With all the recent drama over Facebook and Google+, on leak of personal data information, the question of security of private information becomes essential for all the people and businesses. So where is the limit of privacy in use of big data? Is keeping control of our digital identity keys a solution for us? Monique, you are known as a great advocate and a speaker on ethics and responsible use of big data and digital identity. So we live here in Switzerland, and Switzerland is known for its banking secrecy, historically. Though nowadays, with automated exchange of information, banking together with many businesses is becoming more and more transparent.
Right.
So the question here is this transparency a good thing? And where is the limit of privacy in this big data?
So, Yelena, it's a pleasure to be here today. So I wanted to say, with regard to banking secrecy, it's a question about really what that means. Are we really dealing with secrecy today in Switzerland, given the fact that banks choose you to be a member of its, or a customer of its corporations? When I think back to the financial crisis of 2008, or pre-crisis of 2008, think about the transparency that we could have had. If we have used, for example, the principles of blockchain, we would have seen that perhaps we could have seen the transactions ahead of time, and that would have made it very transparent for customers. Perhaps we could have. That's a thesis in itself. So we are dealing with a polarity between what is considered secret and what is considered transparent. But I will argue that today, and what I see more and more in Switzerland, is that in essence, there is no secrecy per se, in quotes. It depends on perhaps what your bank account may look like or may not look like. But I think really what we have to think about is that banks, like any other corporation or any other group, will choose you to be a customer just as you choose them to be a customer. And with that, you have other dynamics that come into play, and that may be regulation and government-induced behavior. So we have to think about what secrecy means at the end of the day, and why we have to look at transparency, which is really what we need to look at, because behavior is being awarded for the types of risks it takes, and there is no transparency in that kind of behavior. So when banks are too big to fail, they're just too big, and so, hence, therefore, privacy is a tough discussion. Today, over the recent drama in Facebook, I'm speaking about social media, Facebook, Google+, the leak of personal data information. So we become more and more vulnerable to leave our digital prints all over, and misuse of this personal data. Let's say I arrive in my travel destination, and the hotel is treating me with my favorite drink, and I have my favorite flowers in my room, and at the same time I start receiving those unsolicited messages, some spam messages that I don't want. So is this transparency a good thing or a bad thing? Well, the example, Yelena, that you've just given, you're a product. So let's start with what it means to be a product for these particular companies. And it's really a timely discussion, because Apple's Tim Cook just stated 2 days ago that data is becoming weaponized, and companies are using that data to know more about you than you know about yourself, which is to your point, right?
Yes.
Which is to your point. You're served up all kinds of predilections about you that has the appearance of spam, and probably is spam. And I think it's incumbent upon these particular companies to tell you that, hey, look, or you, by the way, to be in control, is to be able to turn that off. And I think this is really very important, because something that is quote unquote free is really not free at the end of the day. And when companies are talking about, when heads of tech companies like Apple's Tim Cook are talking about weaponization of data and how data can be used against you, I think it's time for us to pay attention.
Yeah, it's pretty scary in a certain way. So the question would be, where is the golden standard of ethics?
Well, the golden standard of ethics is that data for I think companies have to tell you how data is being used. But I think moreover, you should be in the middle. So let me give you some examples. Like in Estonia, for example, citizens have the capability of choosing a doctor that they trust over a doctor that they don't trust. And I think that's an example of being able to put you back into the middle. The other example is what happens every day. You and I were just talking earlier, that there's a data breach every day. And it's incumbent upon companies not just to be compliant for compliance's sake. You know, when we think about what happened with Cathay Pacific a few days ago, where over 9 million customers, I think it's about 9 million customers were affected, what happens to you? What happens with an example of Facebook breaches? My concern, and I think our concern should be that we become too immune to those breaches. And when those types of behavior, when that type of behavior is still countenanced by society, then we really have to raise our hands up in the air. And so for companies, it is incumbent upon them to set a gold ethics standards where you are in the center, where you are in the center and control of your data, and they show you how that data can be used. I think another example is what happened to me personally with Swisscom. As you well know, there was a breach where data for their VIP customers fell into the wrong hands or one of their 1,500 providers or suppliers or partners. And I received an SMS or a text message to say that I was affected. And to go to a particular portal and to do whatever is required in that portal. But there was a loss of trust. There was a loss of trust, and that's what we're dealing with, is a loss of trust.
Correct.
Do you think the company came back to me and said, "Hey, Monique, we're sorry that this happened to you. We're going to give you a 2-month rebate or a discount"? No, they did not. And I'm very concerned about that level of arrogance that we see in our society by companies that don't really treat you as the customer that you are.
So I totally agree with you that so the companies that take our data, they should also stay responsible, very responsible for using this data. And at the same time, you spoke about the digital identity keys. That is this a solution for us, that we keep those keys in control, in our personal control.
So digital identity keys can be analogous to like keys to a Trezor or keys to a safe deposit box. It's a step forward, Helena. It's a step forward where you would have sort of digital keys that you would share with your members of your family, where you would actually control those data identity sets about you. And I think this is something that we need to really pursue, not only from a research perspective, but also from a development perspective, to put you back into the center of that universe of control of your data. And I will say that Tim Berners-Lee of the World Wide Web is actually looking at examples of how you can use a newer web, if you want to call it, to control your own data.
Yeah, so to whom I can give the access, to whom I don't give the access. So I keep this control in my hands. That is very, very important.
That is indeed the goal.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to businesses to keep up with this golden standard?
Well, I think so. Here's the biggest advice I would give to businesses it doesn't take much for a brand to be tainted. It is really you need to be responsible for setting up that gold standard to really gain the customer's trust. You need to prove it. And if it's broken, you need to actually come to the table and say, we broke your trust, and come back to the consumer or the customer and engage them in a way that, as the example I stated, we want to perhaps give you a rebate, we want to do something to gain that trust back. But in the end of the day, it's about you being in the center and you keeping those businesses accountable. So I think the business that really sets the gold standard in ethics and data is really going to be the business more and more that we want to see of in the 21st century.
Yes. The bottom line is that it becomes part of their brand, part of their image.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Monique.
Thank you, Yelena.
Thank you for watching this interview with Monique Morrow in partnership with Dukascopy TV, and stay tuned to our next episode of Inside Tomorrow with Yelena.